So I'm supposed to keep this slide up until the photo is done. That is done. OK, awesome. So short bit about me. This is me, actually. That's what I do when I'm not sitting at a computer coding. I'm a glider pilot in my spare time. If you have any questions or want to know more about it, these are my Twitter and GitHub handles. Feel free to ask me. I work for simplabs. We're a small consultancy based in Munich, and we do basically consulting all over Europe. And if you want to have one of these cute little stickers, hit me up after the talk. So back to the talk. This talks about internationalization and why it's easy in Ember. And you might be wondering, what's up with the weird title? We're in the US. You might spell it with a Z. I learned yesterday that it's Z and it's Z, because Z, it's in the UK, apparently. But the weird thing is, in the UK, they don't use Z either. They use an S. In Germany, we call it Internationalisierung. So as you can see, us Germans, we like the long words. We just put a few more letters in. Then in the Netherlands, it's Internationalisering. So basically, they took the German version, put a few letters out again. And, well. And the Japanese, they do some really interesting stuff. It's apparently Kokusai-ka. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. So that's one example of internationalization, which is translation. But there's a lot more in internationalization that's also included there. One of the things that's related to translations is plurals. And you can see here an example of counting apples, basically. So we have 0 apples, we have 1 apple, 2 apples, and 10 apples. And you can see that for 1 apple, there's a special case. It doesn't have the S at the end, right? Let's look at another example, which is fish. Huh. So apparently, there's no word called fishes. It's just fish. So you can see also inside of a language, the plural cases are not always easy and clear. I got another example, still apples, this time from Indonesia. They have 0, I'm guessing it's called apple, I don't know, 1 apple, 2 apple, and 10 apple. So they don't have a plural form. There is just one form. So if you want to learn Indonesian, it's, well, somewhat easy, I guess. Then contrast that with Arabic. They have 6 different plural forms. So these are the rules, basically. You have one rule where it's just, well, it's 0 things. It's 1 thing. It's 2 things. And then they have another form if it's from 3 to 10, from 103 to 110, and then another form, 11 to 99, another form for 100 to 102. It is crazy. The good thing is all these rules are documented, and it's relatively easy to figure out what to actually use. You can see the URL at the bottom. I will put the slide deck up on the speaker deck later and post the link to the Discord channel. Another thing that's included in internationalization is number formatting. You can see at the top the US and the UK and China, for example, they use the comma symbol as the thousand separator and a period symbol as the decimal separator. In contrast to that, France and Russia, for example, they use a space as a thousand separator and a comma as the decimal. Switzerland uses an apostrophe, and Germany just does the reverse from the US, basically, which is not confusing at all, as you can imagine. Yeah, so but it gets even weirder. Let's look at this. I mean, the top, OK, that's easy. Russia and France, that's easy. But the bottom one is India. They don't separate by thousands. They use a 3-2-2 system. So you start at the right. You go 3 digits to the left. You put a comma there. Go 2 digits to the left. Go put a comma there. 2, and then 3, and 2, and 2, and 3, and so on. Yeah, I'm serious. I don't know how that came to be, but that's just the default in India. So good luck formatting that. Closely related to that is currency formatting. It's common in the US and the UK to put the dollar sign at the front, so before the actual number. In Germany, we put the euro sign behind the actual number. Russia does the same with their currency. But that actually depends on the language you're in, not necessarily where you're at. So even in Germany, we would put the dollar sign behind the number, even though in the US, you would put it in front. Another thing included in internationalization is date and time formatting. At the top, you can see the ISO 8601 specification. So that is today. I'm not sure if the time matches. That's not that bad. OK. So at the top, you could see China, which is basically roughly similar. You have the year first, next is the month, and then comes the day, and then just the time, which is mostly the same everywhere. Spain does it a bit differently. They put the date first, the day first, then the month, then the year. And the US, sorry, I have no idea what you're doing there. It's weird. While we're on that topic, seriously, guys, what? Units is also a part of internationalization. Like everywhere else in the world, we use metric, but apparently you need to be special. So, sorry. OK, so let's go on. We need to get a few words clear first. The first one is internationalization itself. And I've put down a quote from Mozilla. And that is, internationalization is the design and development of a product that enables easy localization for target audiences that vary in culture, region, or language. Who here knows why it's abbreviated as I18N? That's not too many. OK, so it's actually quite easy. Count the number of characters between the I and the N at the end.
0.
At the end, yeah. It's not IN. 18, exactly. So it's basically I, 18 characters, and then N, because internationalization is not only hard to pronounce, but also hard to spell if you're writing it down. OK, the next thing, localization, L10N. You can imagine where that abbreviation comes from. Localization refers to the adaptation of a product to meet the language, cultural, or other requirements of a specific target market. Also the same definition source from Mozilla. And in summary, internationalization is roughly what developers do. Localization is what translators do. So in a sense, internationalization enables localization, roughly. Another term we need to get clear is locale. And locale is defined as a set of parameters that define the user's language, region, or any special variant preferences that the user wants to see in the user interface. So keep that in mind, language, region, and variants. One example of that is BCP 47, which is a specification on how to define a locale. I've put one example up here, which is Brazilian Portuguese. So basically the Portuguese language spoken in Brazil. And you can see in the front, there is the language specifier, then a dash, and then the region specifier. It's important to note, though, that the region is optional. You don't have to include it. So for example, you could just use EN for English. But you can also put a variant in between. This example is Chinese as spoken and written in Hong Kong in simplified script. So the HANS is the script that's actually meant. I've talked about EN, like the region being optional. So you can imagine each of those locales has a default region. That gets interesting. This one's easy. German is from Germany. OK, we can deal with that. Spain is also roughly easy. Well, it's from Spain, so it's probably Spain. I want to do a quick vote. What do you think is English? Is it the UK or is it the US?
US. #1, baby.
So Tom's right. It's the US. OK, I can deal with that. But what really surprised me earlier this year was Portuguese. What do you think? Portugal? You'd think so, but it's actually Brazil. And apparently, the rules that I found is the country with the most native speakers of that language gets to win.
Do they ever reevaluate?
I don't know. Let's hope not. Just for completeness sakes, I've put Chinese in there too, so you can see it's not just Latin. You can also put the simplified script of Chinese in there. So that's for theory. Let's go a bit more into code. Who here has heard of window.intl? That's quite a bit. OK, that's good. So window.intl is supported by a lot of current browsers. You can see it goes all the way down to i11. So everything that supports Ember 3 is supported by window.intl too, at least the basics. One thing that window.intl provides is a number format class. You can see it in this example. You basically instantiate a new number format class. You put in the locale specifier, the BCP47. And this class has a format method where you can put in a number, and it would automatically get formatted in the right way. You can see here the Indian formatting, for example. Closely related is currency formatting, as we've already discussed. You can put in an options object into the constructor and tell it that you want to format it as a currency, in this case, euros. And it would automatically do the right thing. Intl also provides us with a datetime format class, which is a little bit weird because by default it actually only formats the date part. But as you can imagine, it has an options object too, where you can basically define everything. You can say I want a long date and a short time and stuff like that. It's actually quite sophisticated. And it basically works the same. You pass in the locale specifier, you use the method, the format method, and then you get back a string with the formatted date and time, possibly. And you might be wondering, where does the browser know how to format all of that? And the answer to that question is the CLDR. It's the Common Locale Data Repository from the Unicode project. And the really cool thing about the CLDR is it's completely open source, and it's uploaded on GitHub and NPM, so we can use it really easily. One example of that is, let's say we want to know what the name of the United States is in Portuguese. We basically npm install the cldr-localnames-modern package on npm. We require it, as we do in a Node application. But in this case, we want a specific JSON file. So we put the main PT territories path in there too. And then we can look at the object that's included from there and look at the locale display names territories US key. And that will give us Estados Unidos, for example. And that's just one example. You can see on the Unicode CLDR GitHub page, they have 36 different projects, so quite a lot. Each of those projects includes multiple JSON files per locale, so it's quite a lot of data. And you can see it includes basically everything that we've already discussed, like dates, numbers, locale names, units, everything basically, and even more. Okay, let's go on to the next topic. This is single E's for translations, just if you're wondering. So one of the first translation systems that was invented was gettext. It was invented in 1990 roughly by Sun Microsystems and later rewritten as a GNU project. And despite the age, it is still widely used. And it's basically relatively simple. You have PO files, which are basically the translation files. And they include the original translation as the English string, or whatever you use as the original, as the message ID. And then the message string is the translated translation. Well, you know what I mean. You can see there is this %s. That means there's a placeholder there. One problem that gettext has, it can't handle multiple placeholders very well. So it can handle it, but you can't change the order. And you can imagine there are some languages, locales, where it's really important how the words are ordered, obviously. And if you want to have a placeholder in front of the other placeholder in one locale and behind the other one in the other locale, it's basically impossible with gettext. So that's a problem. Another system that uses localization and internationalization is Ruby on Rails. They solve this quite easily by using named placeholders. So in this example, you can see there is the %sign and then the curlies with name in it. So you can imagine you have multiple placeholders, each with their own placeholder name. And that gets really easy to reorder them, basically. But Ruby has another problem, or Rails has another problem, and that is plurals. You can see plurals are supported, but it's not that easy. I have an example. He has 5 apples and 1 tomato. And 5 apples and 1 tomato being the dynamic parts of the string. So basically having 2 plurals inside of one translation. That is basically impossible with Rails. Now, let's go even further. We want to generate. So now we support he, she, and they. And if you want to support that with Ruby on Rails, good luck. Fortunately for us, there is a good solution in JavaScript, or basically a lot of other languages too, which is called ICU. It looks quite complicated. Let's go through it. You can see the curlies everywhere. And they work basically like in handlebars. And the first example is the select up in the top. And you can think of that as a handlebars helper, essentially. So we're calling the handlebars the ICU helper select, putting in the gender variable, and then deciding if gender is male, we put in he has. If gender is female, we output she has. And if it's basically anything else, we use they have. Next, we use the plural helper. We put in the apples variable. And this time, we're comparing against the numbers. So if it's exactly 0, we use no apples. If it's the plural category 1, as you can see in Arabic, for example, we had these plural categories. We use 1 apple. Or if it's anything else in English, we use the pound is the actual number, and then apples. Same for tomatoes at the end. And while this looks complicated, it's relatively easy to use. This is just pseudocode. In reality, it looks a little bit different, but in general, quite similar, actually. We basically have a translation helper function. We pass in the key to the translation, and then an object that basically defines all the variables that we put into the translation. So in this case, a male gender, we put in 5 apples and 0 tomatoes, resulting in he has 5 apples and no tomatoes. And now the slide you've all been waiting for. It's easy in Ember. Yay. I want to give a huge shout out to Jason Mitchell, who's unfortunately not here as far as I can see. Anyways, clap, clap, clap. So he's the current maintainer and inventor of Ember Intl, and he's doing a fantastic job with that. I don't want to go too far into detail because I have limited time here, but this is roughly how it works. So Ember Intl basically defines one locale for your whole application. So it's impossible, as far as I know, to have one part of the application in Chinese and the other one in English. But I think that's probably a good thing. So what Ember Intl does is it defines it provides an Intl service, and you need to set the locale property of that service to actually use it properly. So that's the first thing we want to do in our app. And the usual way we do this is by using the before model hook in the application route. And you can see we have an imaginary figure out locale method there, or function, that would return something like en or de or I don't know, whatever locale you want to have. And you can basically do whatever you want there. You can check your cookies. You can do a database request to the backend, whatever you can imagine, basically. You can look at the browser headers. Once we figured that out, we set the locale property, and then we're finally ready to use the service. And Intl has 2 APIs, basically. One of them is the service API. It works roughly like this. You have the Intl service. You call methods on it, for example, format number or format date. The other thing you can use is template helpers. And those basically work the same. They are automatically coupled to the Intl service. And you have a format number helper, you have a format date helper, and so on and so on. It also supports translations, obviously. And you can already see it's using the ICU syntax. We're using YAML files. It's actually quite easy. So one example of this, ich heiße Robert Jackson, for example. You call the T helper, you pass in the key to the translation, and you pass in the variables that you want to replace, the placeholders, basically. So basically just the same as I already showed on the ICU slides. OK, so that's it for how to basically use it. It has a lot more APIs, and I leave it up to you to figure that out. I want to talk a little bit about tips and tricks that I've learned while using Ember Intl in the last few years. One thing is async translation loading. This is an example from one of the apps that I work on. It has about, I think, 22 translations or locales that we support. And you can see at the top, those translations amount to 4.8 megabytes. By default, Ember Intl bundles all of them up into your app.js. You can imagine that's not good, because usually you only need one of those locales or translations. So what we want to do is asynchronously load those translations. And this is roughly how it would look like. First, we figure out the locale, as we did before. Then we asynchronously load the translations. We put them into the Intl service. And then finally, we set the locale to activate everything. And fortunately for us, Ember Intl makes this very easy. If you Ember install Ember Intl, it will automatically create an Ember Intl config file. In there, you can set the public only property from false to true. And that basically makes Ember Intl not included into the app.js, but instead output JSON files in the dist folder. So now it looks like this. We now have 6.4 megabytes of data. Yay. But that's OK. We're only loading one of those translation files now, so about 160K maybe. And the way it works now is we basically have those as assets in our dist folder. We can push them to a CDN. We can push them to any other server, basically. And we just need to implement this load translations function, pass in the right URL, and return those translations as JSON. And we're good to go. I already mentioned that Ember Intl is supported all the way down to IE 11, essentially. You can make it work with IE 9 and IE 10 too, if you still have to. But you would need the Intl polyfill. Ember Intl has support for that, but it's rather complicated, so I'm not going to include everything here in the slides. I've written a blog post about that in June. Feel free to check that out. It has basically all the details about that, and I hope I explained it well. Another question that came up quite a few times in the last weeks is, how do we include links in translations? This is an example from a hobby project I maintain. You can see that the pilot name is clickable, so it's a link. And it's part of an actual translation that looks roughly like this. So in this case, we included a HTML tag into the translation. We basically bind a variable to the href attribute and put the pilot name inside of that tag, inside of the link. But the problem with this is that, well, first of all, we can use this because Ember Intl supports HTML if you use the HTML save property at the bottom that you can see. The problem is if we use it like this, it would force a full page reload because it doesn't know that you want to do an in-app transition. It would basically reload the app at the URL you specified. But there is a good solution for that, and I think Lily already mentioned it today, Ember href2. You can use the href2 helper to generate the right URL, and the href2 add-on will automatically make sure that this absolute URL is transformed into an in-app transition. So that works pretty well, and while we still cannot use generic components inside of translations, this is still a good way to at least enable links. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah!